Thank you, Professor Kelkar. I thank CSG for this wonderful opportunity to be here to share some of my thoughts here. Rather than a celebration, I don't see Women's Day as a celebration. Probably it could be a time to critically self introspect us in looking at the situation in which the country is, probably in related to the gender equality is concerned. That is what I'm just going to. Rather than getting into any specific kind of area as such, I'm just going to lay down a larger theoretical framework, hopefully within the stipulated time, larger theoretical framework and its relevance in the contemporary time. I'm also trying to provide some of the data also, recent data, which shows that these patriarchal notions are something which are still continuing as far as the Indian society is concerned. To a larger extent, it is not only India, all over the world, but to be very specific, I'm just going to quote some of the data from the Indian situation also. As far as the gender hierarchy is concerned, if you're going to look at that, many times we understand gender hierarchy by raising some of the questions, a Socratic way of understanding only. But why do women dress like this? Why do women wear ornaments? Why do women have this Mangal Sutra Tali? Why there is a very locality where women have to move to the husbands? Like this, various questions whenever we try to really bring up in our mind, many times most of us don't really engage in such kind of a critical self introspection. Many times when we run behind this question, we will try to understand the whole patriarchal structure, which plays a very significant role as far as the society is concerned. To be very specific, the patriarchy is not something which is very confined to the private sphere. As we know that whenever it exists in the private sphere, automatically there is a possibility of it having an impact as far as the public sphere also. That is what we see in the contemporary times, as Director Professor Nanda also pointed out regarding the labor participation rate. If you're going to look at the past 2 decades, it is coming down. It's something which is very shocking as far as the women's participation level is concerned. I don't know whether we are moving towards in trying to uphold the conservative value of women shouldn't participate as far as labor is concerned, or somewhere we need to really introspect those aspects also. These notions are not something which are very specific to the third world countries as such. We need to understand that. I can just give you an example of Oxford University, which is considered as a very higher seat of learning, which was started in the year 1096, but they started awarding degree to women only in 1920. Almost 824 years later only. Still the time, the notion which prevailed over there is that women does not have the ability to get education or think critically. That is what the whole notion that prevailed in the Western societies also. Even the Cambridge also gave degree to the women, started awarding degree to women almost 739 years later only. Till the time the patriarchal notions were quite prevalent over there at all. If I'm going to quote eminent gender historian Gerda Lerner, she is one of a very feminine, very prominent academician whose book, The Creation of Patriarchy, is still one of our classical texts whenever we want to understand this patriarchy is concerned. How patriarchy manifests and institutionalize the domination of men over women and children within the family and extends its influence over the public sphere in the society. So, whatever notions we carry at the private sphere, these are the things which are going to be exhibited to a larger extent at the private sphere. In spite of all our education, in spite of all our progressiveness, many times we do exhibit those things which we practice. That has been, we have been socialized from the beginning as far as the household level is concerned. That is the reason why whenever we want to really bring about any kind of a progressive changes, we need to really critically introspect the whole value system that exists as far as our society is concerned. That is going to play a very significant role. As far as the Indian context is concerned, we cannot understand patriarchy without understanding the relation between the patriarchy and the caste system in India is concerned. To be very specific, if I want to quote Dr. Ambedkar's work on the caste in India, the mechanism, it is considered still as one of a very, very significant work to understand about the nature of the caste system as far as and patriarchy, the Brahminical patriarchy as as far as the India is concerned. In 1916, he presented this paper in an anthropological seminar in Columbia University. If you're going to, I'm just going to quote some of the data to show that how relevant that paper is even in the contemporary times. The nature of the society, the whole social structure, what he tried to explain in his paper, it's still a very, very relevant one for us to understand that one. What he is trying to talk about as far as the patriarchy is concerned, he says that the whole caste system, as far as India is concerned, the whole the functional component of the caste system is the patriarchy. That is controlling the sexuality of the women. That plays a very, very significant role as far as the whole caste system to sustain for quite a long period. How do they control the sexuality of women? It is only through the endogamous marriage. That has been one of a very prominent one as far as the Indian society is concerned. I'm just going to give some data later also regarding this endogamous marriage is concerned. And there also he tries to do a critical understanding how if a particular community is going to have an imbalance between the men and women, then they try to adopt certain kind of a mechanism to address that one. For example, if there are going to be more women and less men over there, that is where they try to practice the sati, they try to practice the widowhood. All these practices have been introduced to not break the whole endogamy, but also to maintain the balance between the men and women is concerned. In a similar way, how the men, if a man, there is going to be more men and also a lesser women over there, that is where they also try to prescribe how this sainthood has been given to the men, as where they'll go in a religious journey, they'll go. If not, there is a possibility of child marriages, which is also one of a prescribed one as far as, so that the whole endogamous marriage system doesn't break away from this one. All the caste system continues. It is so relevant for us because still now we find that the marriages to a larger extent in India is concerned, more than 90% of the marriages happens within the particular caste only. So that reflects the nature of the endogamy, which is continuing even in the contemporary time as far as the Indian system is concerned. And further, he also talked about the hypergamy and hypogamy. The hypergamy is the one where the upper caste is allowed to marry the lower caste. That is to some extent allowed. Hypergamy is about the low caste men marrying the upper caste. That is absolutely not accepted at all as far as the Indian system is concerned. That is where you will find all these honor killings. When you are going to look at the record, most of the honor killings happen whenever the women is going to be from the upper caste and the men is going to be from the lower caste, because ultimately you are going to trace your lineage in a patrilineal manner only. Through the men only you are going to trace the lineage. You are going to carry the initial, or the family base is going to be only from the men. So that shows the nature in which the whole system has this patriarchal notions as far as the Indian society is concerned. When you're going to look at all kinds of cultural practices, even in contemporary times, many of the cultural practices, the kind of resistance being offered in many of the, what we see in the Sabarimala case, also what kind of a resistance has been shown over there, that shows these notions are still entrenched as far as the Indian thinking is concerned. Why we need to understand this patriarchal notions as far as the India is concerned, that is very important for us to understand how the agency of the women is being restricted from the time of the birth. It is not only something which is going to operate when you're going for a work or something. It is something which is going to restrict the agency of the women at every point of time. As we know that the kind of feticide and other things, which shows that even before the birth itself, the women have been eliminated as far as in many situations are concerned. So that shows that the women to attain the leadership is the second question. The first thing is that the women has to first participate freely. That is the first thing over there. There itself, these notions are creating a larger structural obstruction as far as the women empowerment is concerned. So whatever kind of a data we want to look at as far as the Indian situation is concerned, unless and until we don't try to locate it within this larger structural patriarchal notions are concerned, then it will be it will not be easy for her to really understand the real meaning of the data also. So I'm just going to, as I told you in the beginning, these are the larger theoretical conceptual framework. I'm just trying to limit it as of now because I know that I have very limited time only. So probably I could, during during the discussion also we could elaborate something on that one. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take up some of the data to show that these notions which has been emphasized by the Ambedkar and others a long period ago, which still has a very strong relevance as far as the Indian society is concerned. As I told you, the intercaste marriages are concerned. The National Family Head Survey 2005-6 is one insignificant one which tries to show that there are only around 10% of marriages as far as the India is concerned. They are intercaste marriages over there. And within this intercaste marriages, also the pratiloma marriages, that is the upper caste woman marrying a lower caste man, is very, very limited. Around 4% only you will find that happening over there. And also the IHDS, that is the Indian Human Development Survey, which happened in the year 2011-12. That also tries to give information that it's only around 5.4% as far as the intercaste marriages in India is concerned. This shows that the women's agency in trying to choose a partner. This is one step. This is not a something which is going to give a comprehensive, but it shows that how women's sexuality is something which is to a larger extent constrained by the whole societal structure. It doesn't allow it to break away and move in a free manner at all. And whenever they try to do that, we have this concept of honor killing. I don't know whether it's a honor. As you know, that after a lot of struggle by the women's movement, finally in 2014 only you will see that National Crime Records Bureau started recording this whole honor killing in India is concerned. Even though the numbers are not going to really show the real picture, because it shows around 400 honor killings between the year 1914 and 16. But many times we may not be able to really know whether a particular killing is something which is based on the honor killing or not at all. That all shows that whoever wants to break away, that too very specifically, women cannot break away from their whole the patriarchal notions. It's not very easy for her at all. And second significant aspect is regarding the child marriages. As I told you, Ambedkar identified during that period itself how the child marriages are something which are one of a mechanism through which how the endogamous community maintains the balance between the male and female is concerned. It's really startling to see that the census of India 2011, which shows that around 12 million children in India are married before the age of 10 years. Around 12 million children, out of which 84% of Hindus and 11% are Muslims also. They give such a kind of a specific data also. Even though we have a law which prohibits the Prohibition of Child Marriage Act in 2006 is there, it is not an act which is going to make a child marriage as a void ab initio. That means that it will only make it as a voidable. After the marriage, if men, or that is a girl or a boy, complains to the police or makes a complaint, then only they can make it as a void. If nobody is going to complain, that is the two parties who are going to get married, they are not going to complain, it is not considered as illegal at all. If imagine if they're going to make it except in few places, for example, Karnataka is one classical example. They made it as through a state amendment, they made it as a void ab initio. So automatically when the child marriage happens, automatically it becomes a void one. So in this way, another important report also I want to quote, probably would refer regarding this is very specifically related to the female foeticide and infanticide is concerned. In 2012, the Indian government came out with the report, the Children in India 2012, a statistical uprising, which shows that around 3 million girls were missing in 2011 compared to 2001. We're talking about the women leadership, but 3 million children did not have the opportunity to even see the whole world. Then only they can even think about the other aspects as far as the leadership is concerned. That shows that the child sex ratio, this is very interesting data to quote, in fact, the child sex ratio of the age group 0 to 6 has reduced from 945 in 1991 to 914 in 2011. Almost you have more than 20-25% of the child ratio has reduced between the 2 decades. But the interesting point is that the overall sex ratio showed an improvement from 927 to 940. It's only the child sex ratio, that is between the 0 and 6, that shows the decline. That gives a different kind of a picture how the women's life is being valued at the time of birth is concerned. And the next significant data is regarding the women reservation. As we know that it's been one of demand for quite a long period. In 1996, the bill was first placed in the parliament. Still now we are struggling to get any kind of development over there, even though it was once passed in Rajya Sabha in 2011, but it was not passed in Lok Sabha later. The women's, why it is more significant, even though we try to boost the 2019 Lok Sabha is something which has a maximum number of women, that is around 14% we have in the 2009 Lok Sabha. Around 14% of the women are being represented over there. But if you're going to look at in 1950 itself, we have around 5%. So almost like 70 years later, we have just able to increase only 9% of the women's participation as far as the politics is concerned. It's really stunning to see how it is being, in spite of many political parties talking about the women's reservation. Yeah, we do agree that the intersectionality do play a significant role, but that is not the reason to stop the whole implementation as far as the women's reservation is concerned, as far as the politics. As Director Nanda has indicated in the beginning, the women's female labor force participation, it's really shocking when he quoted the data. I'm also trying to quote the same data. That is, by 1990, we had around 30.3% of participation as far as the female labor force participation is there. In
Dr. 2000, yeah. Dr. Venkat, you have 2 more minutes.
Yeah, sure. So it has declined to almost 20.5% in 2019. It was a complete steep decline. In fact, the Global Gender Gap Index also, which shows that India was pushed towards 149 position in 2020. So these are some of the indicators which shows that there is a kind of larger patriarchal notions which constrains the women from participating. There has been debate going on regarding the Maternity Benefit Act also, which has extended the benefit to the women from 12 to 26 years. But the whole criticism is that by extending the number of days of holidays for women, you're trying to again reinforce that women are responsible to take care of the women, rather than giving the same kind of rights to men also. That means that the same amount of leave has to be provided to men also. Once you're going to provide to women only, you're trying to reinforce that women are responsible for children. And second aspect is that once you're going to give that, the employability of women is going to be reduced, because everybody knows that women has to undergo this, so their employability has to be reduced. They will not try to employ women also. So in this way, we need to have a larger structural understanding, so that at every aspect and every domain, if you're going to do that, the women's agency is being restrained from the time of their birth and till it continues till the time of death. That's what we can see that through this data, even though it's only a specific data I've quoted. If you want, we can have a larger set of data to understand the whole picture as far as the women is concerned, how the patriarchy tries to constrain the women is concerned. I'll just stop my talk with us, and if there is any question or discussion, I'll take it up later. Thank you. Before questions, I'll just add up to the last presentation. Yes, we have made a lot of progress, but as far as the policy perspective is concerned, still the patriarchal notions are something which plays a significant role. I'll just try to point out the 3 important laws. One is the Hindu laws of inheritance, where if a woman is going to die without a will, automatically it goes to the husband's family over there. It doesn't go to the women's parents over there. That is one kind of shows that the women after marriage belongs to the husband's family. And second is the age of consent. There has been a lot of controversy also, because below 18 years we have a law which says it is rape, but child marriages are still not illegal in India. That is, if you're going to marry after 15 till 18, even if you're going to have sex, it's not considered as a rape. That is also shows one kind of thing. And the third one is very prominent one regarding the Goa law. It's in in Goa, which has been projected in recent times to be a model for the Uniform Civil Code. That's what I'm a bit worried about that one. It says that very specifically that a right to polygamy. That is, if a woman is not going to bear a child till 25 years, the husband has a right to marry another woman. If the woman is not going to bear a male child till 30 years, the husband can marry another woman. This is still a law in Goa. There are some examples that shows that how the patriarchal notions are still prevalent as far as there are many laws over there. I'm just trying to point out a few of them.
But the important question is that despite this patriarchy, how women are making their way out, kind of thing. How they are charting out their path and moving ahead. This is important, and this needs to be recognized.
True.
So that would be very, very important. You pointed out, Dr. Venkatarayan, about patriarchal structures, how this limits women's agency right.
Yes, sir. Can I make a small comment over now?
Okay, yes.
Yeah. I agree with Professor Nitya Rao that along with the legal reformation, there has to be a policy support system, no doubt about that one. But also, we should make sure that the policy support system is also something which is going to bring about a real development in the lives of women, rather than trying to reinforce the patriarchal nature as far as the jobs is concerned. Like as we see in many of the self-development group, how the certain gender-based rules are something again reaffirmed, whatever the kind of a nature of job. To quote also, I'll try to show that only in the MSME sector, only you have around 13.6% of the women entrepreneurs over there. So that is also quite shocking. We need to increase the policy intervention, should be more inclusive in trying to expand the scope as far as the women is concerned. Even in the corporate leadership, with Professor Maithili was talking about, we have around only 11% of them in as far as the leadership position is concerned. That is also something which needs to be so. The policy reforms, policy support system also has to be oriented in such a manner that slowly we have to shed the patriarchal notions and value system associated with that one. So along with that, the legal reforms are going to bring about a lot of transformation, help women to really exhibit more of the leadership skills as concerned. That's my point. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
If I may just, Professor
Any
Nityanand,
other
I think,
participants would like to have any comments?
yeah, I'll just make a concluding comment. Mainly, I don't have anything much to add. I just wanted to thank you and thank CST for the opportunity for having this discussion today on International Women's Day. I think in India, we have seen a lot of progress, a lot of legal progress as well, especially in the 2000s. In the decade of the 2000s, there was a lot of legislation on violence. I think the Justice Verma Commission. And I think what we need to be really careful, and we need to, International Women's Day is about mobilization, about organization, about celebration. And my request to everybody is that we have to again get together to actually fight and struggle against the setbacks or the move backwards that we are seeing over the last couple of years, whether it is in terms of honor killings, whether it is in terms of violence, whether it is in terms of withdrawal of support to women, also to poor men. I would include in this that it is not only women, but when we are moving towards gender equality is what we want. We want equal opportunities in all ways. And I think that some of the pushback that is coming in India against women's rights, I think this is something we need to be really vigilant about, so that, I know that there are many more battles to be won. And I think the women's movement for the last 50 years has been fighting, has been building bridges, has been building networks with other movements. And I think even small victories. I started my career in SEWA, which is Self-Employed Women's Association. It is a trade union of women workers. And one of our mottos was that we should celebrate even small victories, because it is so difficult for women to get equality or victories. We have come a long way since then, but this time, I think, is really, people pointed out, Vidyut ji pointed out to the farmers on the Singur border. The Supreme Court judgment or the Supreme Court said that women farmers can go home, they're not farmers. I think these kind of statements is where we have to be very vigilant and very careful in order to immediately be aware of what is going on and to fight against it. I think we have to know how to choose our battles. And for me, the first battles are really that to hold on to the gains we have already made and then push forward. So with this, I would like to close and wish you all a very happy International Women's Day in solidarity.
Okay, thank you. I guess we do not have any further comments and questions. I hope you all agree that we had a very interesting discussion. We started with, how patriarchy works in our society, in our family, and how that kind of acts as constraint for women coming out, participating in workforce, and eventually taking up the leadership role. We also have seen, discussed that there have been situations where women are coming out in large numbers in a particular fields where women are a large number, but when it comes to leadership role, they are not chosen over men. Suddenly, men are considered to be the, more appropriate for leading even the spheres where women are in large numbers. Now, this is also linked to what was coming from patriarchy, and not just patriarchy, but in a society where equality of opportunity is by and large absent. It's not just about women, but if you think about other marginalized section of population, be it Dalits, be it tribals, you will see a similar thing happening. They might come up to certain level, but then beyond that becomes difficult. But we have also discussed, women taking up leadership role in rural economy, in food security, and how they are providing leadership in a very difficult situation. So the crux, I think, is that the major challenge is that equality of opportunity, which has also been highlighted by the speaker, that whether it's women, whether it's Dalit, whether it's minorities, whether it's tribals, and people coming from poor background in general, who are not empowered to be, from their birth, always find it difficult to go up, So because our society is very feudal also. Now, unless we get into that, unless we ensure equality opportunity, unless we give equal education in terms of quality also to all, it's difficult to get out of all those things. So challenge is very huge. We have seen some progress, but of course that is not good enough, and hopefully we all would be, with our fight, we all would be able to bring a better situation in coming days. I would now request Purnima to formally give vote of thanks to our honorable speakers and other participants. Purnima, please.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, everyone. On behalf of CSD, I extend my deep sense of gratitude to Professor Nityananda for his welcome note and for setting the tone for the discussion, and also for being kind to conclude the session as well. And I'm extremely thankful to Professor Govind Khelkar for agreeing to chair the session and for the wonderful job done. And my special thanks are due to the three speakers Professor Nitya Rao, Dr. Maithili, and Dr. Venkat for their perspectives, the examples given on successful women leaders in food security, and for raising our concerns on critical issues that has to be addressed. And I also express my gratitude to my good colleagues at CST and the fellow participants of this event. Thanking you all. Yeah.
Thank you, Purnima, for giving the opportunity. Thank you, CSD, for giving the opportunity. Ma'am, Nitya ma'am, got to see you on the panel, and I thank you so much. It was a wonderful listening to you, and as well as Venkat Narayan. Good to get in touch.
Thank you everyone. Thank you CSD, and thank you Director Purnima, everyone, and the speakers Maithili ma'am and Nitya ma'am, everyone. It's really very good initiative, and hope we continue this dialogue for a long period.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Purnima, for organizing and getting in touch.
You all.
Thank you.
Thank you.